I was buried in back-to-back meetings at the investment firm I built from nothing when my phone flooded with motion alerts. I glanced down, expecting a delivery driver. Instead, the live feed showed my mother, my sister, and her 3 kids commanding movers to haul their beaten-up furniture right through my front door. As I sprinted to the parking lot, the cold truth hit me. This was not a visit. It was a coordinated invasion to steal my home. My name is Lauren Potter. I am 34 years old, and until 40 minutes ago, I believed that if I worked hard enough, paid enough bills, and kept enough physical distance between myself and my past, I could finally be safe. I was wrong. I sat at the head of the polished mahogany conference table in the main boardroom of Ironwood Harbor Capital, the boutique investment firm I had built from the ground up in Maple Ridge, Colorado. The air conditioning was humming at a steady 70 degrees, a crisp counterpoint to the dry heat baking the asphalt outside. We were in the middle of closing a commercial real estate deal that had been in the pipeline for 6 months, a complex acquisition of a mixed-use development that would cement my firm's reputation in the state. Across from me sat the developers, 2 men in expensive gray suits who still looked at me with that mixture of skepticism and surprise that I had grown used to. They saw a young woman in a town that was still deciding if it wanted to be a city. I saw numbers, leverage, and a future I had carved out with my own fingernails. I was projecting total calm. My hands were clasped loosely on top of my leather folio. My posture was straight, and my voice was even as I explained the projected yield rates over the next 5 years. But beneath the surface, that old, familiar knot of anxiety was tightening in my stomach. It was a phantom sensation, one I had carried since childhood, the feeling that no matter how high I climbed, the floor was made of paper and could tear open at any moment. Usually, I could suppress it. Today, however, the universe decided to test the structural integrity of my entire life. It started with a single vibration. My phone was face down on the table to my right, set to silent mode, but the haptic feedback against the hard wood created a low, buzzing thrum that seemed disproportionately loud in the quiet room. A notification. I ignored it. I made it a point never to check my phone during closing meetings. It was unprofessional, and frankly, there was very little in my life outside of this room that constituted an emergency. I lived alone. I had no pets. My family lived 30 minutes away and usually only called when a utility bill was overdue. I continued speaking, outlining the risk mitigation strategies we had put in place for the second quarter. Then came the second vibration, then a third. Buzz, buzz, buzz. It was an aggressive, staccato rhythm that refused to be ignored. The developer on the left flicked his eyes toward the device, breaking eye contact with me for a fraction of a second. That was when I knew I had to address it, if only to turn the device off completely. I murmured a polite apology, sliding the phone onto my lap under the table while keeping my face trained on the projection screen behind me. I glanced down, expecting to see a relentless telemarketer, or perhaps a system error from the server room. What I saw made the blood drain from my face so fast I felt dizzy. The screen was lit up with a cascade of banners from my home security app. Motion detected. Front porch. Motion detected. Driveway. Motion detected. Hallway. Motion detected. Side gate. Sound detected. Living room. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. My first thought was a break-in. Maple Ridge was generally safe, but my house sat on a hill, somewhat isolated, a prime target for a midday burglary. I unlocked the phone with a trembling thumb and tapped the notification to open the live feed. The video buffered for 2 agonizing seconds before resolving into a crisp, high-definition nightmare. It was not a burglar in a ski mask. It was a U-Haul truck backed up right to the edge of my hydrangeas, crushing the blooms I had paid a landscaper $300 to plant just last week, and standing on my front porch, holding a clipboard and directing 2 burly men in coveralls, was my mother, Carol. I blinked, sure that the stress of the merger was causing me to hallucinate, but the image remained sharp. Carol was wearing her good blazer, the one she usually saved for court dates or weddings, pointing imperiously toward my open front door. Careful with that corner. I could hear her voice through the app's microphone, tinny but unmistakable. That goes upstairs, second door on the left. I switched camera views, my fingers cold and clumsy. I tapped on the living room camera. My sister, Brianna, was standing in the center of my foyer. She was dragging a heavy, battered plastic bin across my hardwood floors, leaving a visible scuff mark in the wax. Behind her, trailing like a chaotic tail, were her 3 sons, my nephews. They were not visiting. They were carrying armfuls of toys, loose clothes, and pillows. This was not a visit. This was a relocation. I watched, frozen in horror, as Brianna dropped the bin and wiped sweat from her forehead. She looked around my living room, my sanctuary, the space I kept pristine and white and quiet, with a look of ownership that made me nauseous. She said something to the oldest boy, pointing toward my kitchen. I switched to the kitchen camera. The boy, who was 10 years old, ran in and dumped a stack of comic books onto my island, right on top of a stack of investment prospectuses I had been reviewing the night before. But that was not the worst part. The worst part was the large cardboard box sitting on my granite countertop. It had been sealed with aggressive layers of duct tape, and written on the side in thick, black permanent marker were 6 words that stopped my breath. Kitchen, toss Lauren's stuff. I felt a physical blow to my chest, as if someone had punched the air out of my lungs. Toss Lauren's stuff, not move, not box up, toss. I looked back at the front door camera feed. One of the movers was hauling a queen-sized mattress up the steps. It was stained and sagging, a stark contrast to the modern architecture of the house. Propped up against the brickwork near the door was a large dry erase whiteboard. It looked like something stolen from a classroom. On it, drawn in cheerful, color-coded markers, was a diagram of my house. The master bedroom, my bedroom, the room with the view of the valley that I had worked 18-hour days for 10 years to afford, was labeled in red, Mom's room. The guest room was labeled in blue, Bry's room. The office, my home workspace where I kept sensitive client files and servers, was labeled in green, Boy's room. My name was nowhere on the board. I watched as my mother high-fived Brianna. It was a sharp, celebratory slap of skin on skin. They were laughing. They looked triumphant. They looked like generals who had just conquered a hostile nation and were dividing the spoils. Lauren? The voice came from beside me. It was Sarah, my executive assistant. She was leaning in. Her voice dropped to a whisper, her eyes wide with concern. She must have seen the color leave my face. Lauren, are you okay? You look like you're going to be sick. I stared at her, then back at the phone, on the screen. My 7-year-old nephew was currently running down my hallway wearing his muddy sneakers, holding a giant poster of a superhero, heading straight for the master suite. My mother was following him, carrying a stack of her own bedding. The cognitive dissonance was blinding. Here, in this room, I was a respected financial manager handling a portfolio worth $50 million. There, on that screen, I was a ghost in my own home, being erased in real time by the people who were supposed to love me. They were not just crashing, they had keys. I saw the flash of silver in my mother's hand as she unlocked the side door for another mover. The spare key, the emergency key I had given her 6 months ago because she had cried about being afraid I would choke on a piece of steak alone and nobody would find my body for days. She had weaponized my own mortality against me. I stood up. The chair legs scraped loudly against the floor, a harsh sound that silenced the room. I apologize, I said. My voice sounded hollow, like it was coming from a tin can connected by a string from miles away. We have a security breach at one of the firm's primary assets. It is a critical situation involving unauthorized access. I have to handle this immediately. It was not a lie. The asset was my life. The unauthorized access was my flesh and blood. The developers looked confused, but the urgency in my posture brokered no argument. Sarah, take over the presentation. Walk them through the risk assessment for the retail zoning. I will be back in contact within the hour. I did not wait for an acknowledgement. I grabbed my phone, my keys, and my purse, and I walked out of the conference room. I did not run, because Lauren Potter does not run, but my walk was brisk, fueled by a mixture of adrenaline and cold, sharp rage. I bypassed the elevator and took the stairs, my heels clicking like gunfire on the concrete steps. By the time I burst out into the parking lot, the heat of the Colorado afternoon hit me, but I felt freezing cold. I got into my car, a silver sedan that was the first luxury item I had ever bought for myself, and locked the doors instantly, as if they could reach me even here. I mounted the phone on the dashboard holder and kept the feed open. As I reversed out of my spot and peeled onto the main road, ignoring the speed limit, I watched the screen. Brianna was now in my kitchen. She was opening my cupboards. I watched her take my set of hand-painted wine glasses, gifts from a client in Italy, and drop them, one by one, into a trash bag. She did not even look to see if they broke. She just cleared the shelf to make room for a stack of mismatched plastic Tupperware she was pulling out of a dirty box. This was not a misunderstanding. This was not a desperate family seeking shelter for a night. I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. The road ahead blurred, but my mind was sharpening into a terrifying clarity. They had planned this. The whiteboard, the labels, the movers, the timing. They knew I had this meeting every Tuesday at 2 o'clock. They knew I would be unreachable for 3 hours. This was an invasion, a coup. "Okay," I whispered to the empty car, my voice shaking with a fury I had never allowed myself to feel before. "Okay." I pressed the accelerator. The engine roared, propelling me toward the house on the hill, toward the family that had decided that everything I had built was simply a resource waiting to be harvested. They thought they were moving into a home. They had no idea they were walking into a war zone. The drive home was usually my decompression chamber. It was the 20 minutes where I shed the skin of the investment manager who navigated high-stakes equity deals and slipped into the skin of the woman who enjoyed silence, Pinot Noir, and organized closets. But today, the hum of the engine felt like a countdown clock, and the scenery rushing past, the strip malls, the new developments, the winding road up toward the ridge, felt like a reel of film playing in reverse, dragging me back to the very beginning. I left this town when I was 18 years old. I packed 2 suitcases and a backpack, clutching a partial scholarship to a state university 3 hours away like it was a winning lottery ticket. I remembered the look on my mother's face as I loaded the trunk of my beat-up sedan. It was not pride. It was a sort of pitying skepticism. "You will be back, Lauren," Carol had said, leaning against the porch railing with a cigarette dangling from her fingers. "City life eats girls like you alive. Just do not expect your room to be waiting when you fail." I did not fail. I worked 2 jobs all through college, waiting tables at a diner where the grease smell never washed out of my hair, and filing papers at a law firm where I learned that contracts are the only things in this world that do not lie. I built Ironwood Harbor Capital from a laptop on a second-hand desk in a studio apartment that smelled like mildew. I ate instant noodles so I could afford better software. I missed my 20s. While my peers were backpacking through Europe or getting married, I was studying market trends and acquiring my first small commercial property. The house on the hill was the trophy at the finish line of that marathon. It was a 3-bedroom modern build with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the valley. It was stark, clean, and quiet. To me, it was not just real estate, it was proof. It was the physical manifestation of every Christmas I spent alone in the office, every Thanksgiving I skipped to save money on airfare, and every date I canceled because a client needed reassurance. It was the first thing in my life that was undeniably, legally, 100% mine. But in the twisted economy of the Potter family, mine was a dirty word. My family operated on a different currency, guilt and need. Carol, my mother, was the central bank of emotional manipulation. She had spent her entire life perfecting the role of the victim. If it rained, the universe was targeting her hair. If the car broke down, it was because the mechanic hated single mothers. She had raised us with the narrative that the world owed us something, but she only ever really fought for one of us. Brianna. Brianna was the golden child. She was 2 years older, prettier, louder, and infinitely more charismatic. In high school, she was the prom queen. I was the girl who tutored the football team for extra cash. I vividly remembered sitting at the kitchen table one humid July evening, trying to balance my checkbook to see if I could afford a graphing calculator for calculus. "We have a surprise for Bri," Carol had announced, bursting through the door, jingling a set of keys. They had bought her a car. It was used, sure, but it was a convertible. "She needs it for her image. Lauren," my mother had told me when I asked how we could afford that, but not my calculator. "Brianna is going places. She needs to look the part. You are smart. You will figure your stuff out." I did figure it out. I figured out that I was the safety net they never intended to maintain. Now, Brianna was 36. The golden sheen had worn off, replaced by the frantic energy of a woman perpetually on the brink of disaster. She was a single mother to 3 boys, Liam, Noah, and Mason, who were wild, destructive, and loud. Her marriage had imploded 3 years ago, leaving her with a mountain of debt and no career skills. For the last year, she had been living in a 2-bedroom apartment in the Lower Valley, a place she called the shoebox. "The walls are like paper, Lauren," she would complain to me over the phone, usually while I was trying to review a portfolio. "The neighbors bang on the ceiling if the boys even breathe. We are suffocating in here. It is not healthy for growing boys." I knew what she wanted. She wanted me to fix it. And in small ways, I did. I paid the electric bill when it was 2 months behind. I bought the boys their school clothes and backpacks every August. I sent grocery deliveries when Brianna posted sad statuses on social media about an empty fridge. But I drew the line at the big things. 6 months ago, she had asked me to co-sign a lease on a luxury townhouse. I said no. 3 months ago, she asked for $5,000 for a down payment on a minivan. I said no. That was when the temperature changed. I became the villain. I was the rich aunt who sat in her ivory tower while her family suffered. "You have 3 empty bedrooms, Lauren," Carol had said during Easter dinner, stabbing her fork into a potato as if it were my heart. "It is sinful, really. All that space just collecting dust while your nephews are stepping on each other's heads." "It is my office, Mom," I had replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "And the other is a guest room." "For who?" she had snapped. "You never have guests. You only have money." But they were cunning. They knew direct confrontation would not break me, so they switched tactics. They played the long game. It started with the key. Last November, Carol had called me in hysterics. She had watched a documentary about a woman who choked on a piece of apple and died alone in her kitchen, her body undiscovered for weeks. "I just cannot sleep. Lauren," she had sobbed into the phone. "I keep picturing you up there in that big empty house, falling down the stairs or choking, and nobody would know. Please, just for my peace of mind, let me have a spare key. I promise I will never use it unless it is an emergency. Please, for your mother." I was tired. I was lonely. And despite everything, a small, stupid part of me still wanted her to love me. I wanted to believe she was actually worried about me, not my assets. So I gave her the key. I put it in her hand, and she had hugged me, and for a second, I felt like a daughter. I was such a fool. That key was not for safety. It was the first step of a siege. In the weeks leading up to today, the comments had become more frequent, more pointed. Brianna would come over for a rare visit, bring the boys, and they would run wild through the living room. "Look at this," she would say, spinning around in my foyer. "You could fit my entire apartment in this downstairs area. It just seems so unbalanced, doesn't it?" "Family helps family," Carol would chime in, eyeing my furniture like she was at an estate sale. "That is the rule. We are a pod. We survive together." I had brushed it off as jealousy. I thought it was just their usual bitter background noise. I never imagined they were actually taking measurements. I never imagined that when Brianna asked, "So, what is the square footage of the master again?" she was calculating if her king-sized bed frame would fit. They had been testing the fences. They had been probing for weaknesses. They realized that legally, they had no claim to my money. But physically? If they were inside, if they established residency, if they had their mail delivered here and their toothbrushes in the bathroom, that was a different story. As I turned the final corner onto my street, my hands were shaking so hard I could barely grip the wheel at 10 and 2. The realization washed over me like ice water. The emergency key. The constant complaints about the apartment. The guilt trips about me being alone. It wasn't just envy. It was a business plan. They had looked at my life, my orderly, hard-won, peaceful life, and decided it was a resource that was being wasted on just one person. They had decided to redistribute the wealth. I saw the truck before I saw the house. It was a massive 26-foot rental, taking up my entire driveway. The back gate was down. The invasion was not just happening, it was entrenched. I slammed the car into park at the curb, not blocking them in, but positioning my vehicle like a barricade. I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of leather and expensive perfume, the armor of Lauren Potter, CEO. I needed to remember who I was. I was not the 18-year-old girl begging for a calculator. I was not the daughter who craved a crumb of affection. I was the owner of this property, and I was about to evict my childhood. The engine of my sedan ticked as it cooled, a metallic metronome in the suffocating afternoon heat. I stepped out of the car, my heels sinking slightly into the softened asphalt of my own driveway. The air smelled of diesel exhaust from the rental truck and something else, something stale and dusty, like old attics and damp basements. It was the smell of my sister's life being force-fed into mine. The front door, a solid slab of custom-stained oak that had cost me $4,000, was propped wide open. Jammed against the base to hold it ajar was one of my dining room chairs. It was a mid-century modern piece upholstered in cream linen. I watched, bile rising in my throat, as the rough metal corner of a hand truck scraped against the chair leg. The fabric was already smudged with grease. They were treating my sanctuary like a foreclosure they were stripping for copper wire. I walked up the front steps. My legs felt heavy, disconnected from my body. But my mind was sharpening into a razor edge. I was no longer the sister or the daughter. I was the auditor entering a failing business. I stepped across the threshold. The foyer was unrecognizable. The sleek, minimalist console table, where I usually kept a vase of fresh lilies, was now buried under a mountain of plastic grocery bags filled with clothes. A dirty plush elephant sat on top of my Nest thermostat dial, but it was the sound that hit me hardest. My house, usually a vault of silence, was vibrating with noise. The television in the great room was blasting cartoons at maximum volume. In the kitchen, to my left, I saw my mother. Carol was standing on a stool, my step stool, with a yellow tape measure in her hand. She was measuring the drop of my kitchen window, her mouth full of pins. She looked at me, took the pins out, and smiled. It was not a guilty smile. It was a welcoming one. "Oh, good. You are here," she said, climbing down. "The light in here is terrible in the mornings. Lauren, I am going to bring over those heavy velvet drapes from the old house. They will fit if I just hem the bottom." I stood frozen near the kitchen island. "What is going on?" I asked. My voice was deadly quiet, but it did not register with her. "We are consolidating," she announced, snapping the tape measure back into its casing. We sat down and did the math. Brianna and I, it just does not make sense for us to pay rent on that shoebox while you have 3,000 square feet for one person. It is wasteful. So, we are fixing it. "Fixing it," I repeated. "Exactly," Carol said, brushing dust off her blazer. "We are moving in. We are going to be a real family again. We put the boys in the 2 spare rooms upstairs. I will take the master since I have the bad hip and need the ensuite bath. You can move your things down to that office off the garage. It is perfectly cozy, and you are always working anyway. It makes the most sense." I stared at her. The audacity was so colossal, it felt like a physical weight. She was evicting me from my own bedroom. She was relegating me to the downstairs study, a room with one small window that I used for storage and late-night conference calls. Before I could respond, Brianna came thundering down the stairs. She looked flushed, frantic, and terrifyingly happy. "Lauren, did you see?" She gestured wildly to the ceiling. "The boys love it. Mason is actually jumping on the bed. I have not seen him this happy in 2 years. He says it feels like a hotel." "Get them off the bed," I said, "and get your boxes out of my hallway." Brianna's face fell, morphing instantly into a mask of wounded martyrdom. "Lauren, do not be like that. We are doing this for you, too. You are always so alone in this big, echoey place. It is depressing. Now you will have life around you. You will have family dinners. We are saving you from being a lonely workaholic spinster." She said it with such conviction that I almost laughed. They were framing this invasion as a rescue mission. They were stealing my home and expecting me to thank them for the company. "I did not agree to this," I said, my voice rising just enough to cut through the cartoon noise. "This is my house. My name is on the deed. You cannot just move in." Carol walked over to her purse, which was sitting on my counter next to a bag of melting fast food. She dug around for a moment and pulled out a key. It was the silver key I had given her, the one for emergencies. She held it up to the light, dangling it like a holy relic. "You gave me this," Carol said, her voice dropping to a dangerous, lecturing tone. "You gave me access. You said, 'Mom, this is for you. Possession is 9/10 of the law.' Lauren, you invited us in. You cannot just invite family in and then kick them out like stray dogs because you are in a bad mood." "That was for emergencies," I snapped, "not for a hostile takeover." Brianna stepped forward, crossing her arms. "It is not a takeover. It is a transition, and it is already done. I changed our mailing addresses 3 weeks ago." The air in the room seemed to vanish. "Excuse me?" "The post office," Brianna said, looking smug. "And the school district. I registered the boys for the fall semester using this address. Their transcripts are already transferred. If you try to kick us out now, you are kicking 3 children out of their school district. Do you know how that looks? Do you know what Child Protective Services would say if you made 3 little boys homeless when they are legally registered to live here?" I looked from my sister to my mother. The coordination was breathtaking. This was why Brianna had been asking about the school zones last month. This was why Carol had been so interested in how the mail carrier delivered packages. They had established residency on paper before they ever moved a box. They had built a paper fortress around their invasion. I turned away from them, needing to break their gaze, and my eyes landed on the console table again. Amidst the clutter of their belongings, a blue folder caught my eye. It was labeled in thick black marker, "Potter Cohabitation Agreement." I reached out and flipped it open. Inside was a typed document, clearly drafted on a home computer, but formatted to look official. It had headers, bullet points, and a signature line at the bottom. "Memorandum of Understanding for the Pierce Potter Family Home." I scanned the text. It was insane. It outlined a sharing of assets, where I would continue to pay the mortgage and utilities, while Carol and Brianna would contribute domestic labor and childcare in lieu of rent. It referred to the house not as my property, but as the ancestral seat of the Potter family. "We typed that up for the police," Carol said. Noticing me reading it, she had moved closer, hovering over my shoulder. "Just in case you tried to call them and cause a scene, it proves we have an arrangement. It proves this is a civil matter. They will not touch it. I watched enough legal shows to know that much." My hands were shaking, but not from fear anymore. They were shaking from the sheer adrenaline of the realization. This document, the address changes, the key, they had weaponized the legal system against me. They knew exactly what they were doing. If I screamed, if I threw their boxes out, if I physically tried to stop them, I would be the aggressor. I would be the unhinged woman attacking a grandmother and 3 children in their registered home. They were waiting for me to explode. They wanted a fight because a fight was chaotic, and they thrived in chaos. In a screaming match, they won. In a drama, they were the stars. I closed the folder gently. I looked at the grease stain on my chair. I listened to the thud of my nephews jumping on my custom mattress upstairs. I needed to get out. If I stayed, I would say something that would give them ammunition. If I stayed, I might actually grab my sister by her hair. I needed to leave the battlefield to gather my own army. I forced my facial muscles to relax. I let my shoulders slump. I brought a hand up to my forehead, feigning a sudden onset of a migraine. I cannot do this right now, I stammered, making my voice sound weak and overwhelmed. I feel sick. The shock. It is too much. Carol's face softened instantly into triumph. She thought she had broken me. Oh, honey, I know. Change is hard. Why do you not go lay down in the office? I put an air mattress in there for you. No, I said, backing toward the door. No, I need air. I need to go for a drive. I need to process this. Do not be too long, Brianna called out, already turning back to her boxes. We need help moving the sofa. I did not answer. I turned and walked out the door, past the scuffed chair, past the rental truck, and back to my car. I got in, locked the doors, and started the engine. As I backed out, I saw Carol watching me from the front window, measuring the glass for her drapes. She looked like a queen surveying her new kingdom. She had no idea that she had just declared war on an investment shark. I was not driving around the block to cool off. I was driving to the office of the most ruthless real estate attorney in the county. They wanted to play games with residency and paper trails? Fine. I was about to show them the difference between a homemade contract and a court order. I drove like a fugitive, weaving through the mid-afternoon traffic of Maple Ridge until I reached the glass and steel complex that housed the law offices of Marsh & Associates. Daniel Marsh was not just a lawyer. He was a shark in a tailored suit who had helped me structure the acquisition of my first commercial strip mall. He specialized in real estate and high-conflict civil litigation. I needed a shark. I needed something with teeth. I burst into his office without an appointment, bypassing the receptionist who knew me well enough to just wave me through. Daniel was on a call, his feet up on his desk, but when he saw the look on my face, the sheer, pale terror mixed with adrenaline, he hung up the phone immediately. Lauren? He dropped his feet to the floor, his brow furrowing. You look like you just saw a murder. Worse, I said, dropping my purse onto one of his visitor chairs. My mother and sister are currently moving into my house. They have a moving truck. They have a whiteboard assigning rooms. They have changed their mailing address to my house, Daniel. They have a contract they typed up for the police. Daniel listened in silence as I vomited out the details. The key I had given for emergencies, the text messages about the apartment, the ambush while I was at work, the Pierce-Potter cohabitation agreement. He did not look sympathetic. He looked clinical. He pulled a yellow legal pad toward him and uncapped a pen. Okay, listen to me very carefully, Daniel said, his voice dropping to that low, serious register he used when closing a deal. This is not a family dispute. This is a residency trap. If they sleep there, if they receive mail there, if they can prove they have established a presence with your verbal or implied consent, you are looking at a civil eviction process. In Colorado, that can take months. We are talking about 30 to 60 days of hearings, notices, and sheriff interventions, all while they live in your house and destroy your property. I felt the blood drain from my face. They said they already changed the school registration. Of course they did, Daniel said, scribbling furiously. They are building a shield. If you call the cops now, they will show that fake contract, show the school papers, and the cops will say, "Sorry, ma'am, this is a civil matter." They will walk away, and you will be stuck with them. So what do I do? I asked, my voice trembling. Do I just let them take it? Absolutely not, Daniel snapped. We go nuclear, but we do it legally. First rule, you do not sleep there tonight. You do not stay under the same roof. If you do, it implies acceptance of the living arrangement. Second rule, you do not say the word yes or okay to anything. Third, we need to secure the perimeter. He stopped writing and looked up at me. Who owns the house? Lauren? Is it on the deed as Lauren Potter? I paused, my mind racing back to the closing documents from 5 years ago. I remembered the advice of my tax accountant at the time. No, I said. a flicker of hope sparking in my chest. It is not. I bought it under my company's name. It is an asset of Ironwood Harbor Capital, LLC. I lease it from my own company. Daniel slammed his hand on the desk, a rare display of emotion. That is it. That is the silver bullet. This is not a family home. This is corporate property. They are not trespassing on their daughter's house. They are trespassing on a commercial asset. The family dispute argument just died. He turned to his computer and began typing rapidly. I need you to log into your USPS account right now. If they change their address, they might have tried to add themselves as authorized users to your existing box to intercept your mail. I pulled out my phone, my fingers flying over the screen. I logged into the Postal Service app and navigated to the Preferences section. There, under Authorized Recipients, was a pending request submitted 2 weeks ago. Carol Potter. I clicked on the image of the request form. There was a signature at the bottom. It read Lauren Potter, but the loop on the L was wrong. It was shaky. It was a forgery, and not even a good one. They forged my signature, I whispered, turning the phone so Daniel could see. They submitted a form to the federal government forging my signature. Save that image, Daniel commanded. Screenshot it, email it to me, print it. That is mail fraud. That is a federal offense. We are building a case that moves this from sad family drama to criminal enterprise. He stood up and began pacing. Okay, here's the plan. We need to lock down the physical asset before they can fully entrench. You need a locksmith, but not a regular one. You need high-security electronic access. Do not use keys. Keys can be stolen. Keys can be copied at a hardware store. You need a keypad with a code that you control from the cloud. They are inside right now, I argued. How can I change the locks if they are inside? You wait for them to leave, Daniel said. Even for 5 minutes, or you do it on the exterior doors they are not guarding. But actually, I want you to upgrade the surveillance first. You said you have cameras? Just the standard doorbell and perimeter ones, I said. Not enough, Daniel said. I know a private security firm, Titan Security. I will call them. I want them to install audio recording cameras in the common areas, the living room, the kitchen, the hallways. Tell them it is for liability protection of corporate assets. If Carol and Brianna want to live in a corporate building, they get corporate surveillance. We need to record every threat, every admission of guilt. I nodded, taking mental notes. What about the neighbors? They are going to make a scene. Good, Daniel said. We want a scene. We want witnesses who are not related to you. Who lives next door? Mr. Landon, I said. He is a retired police sergeant. He hates noise. He mows his lawn at 8 o'clock sharp every Saturday. Perfect, Daniel said. And the HOA? Strict, I replied. They fined me $50 once for leaving a trash can out too long. Call them, Daniel instructed. Call Mr. Landon and call the HOA president. Tell them that squatters are attempting to occupy the property and that there may be a police incident. Frame it as you protecting the neighborhood from a disturbance. Ask them to keep an eye out and report any aggressive behavior. We need independent affidavits. I spent the next hour in Daniel's conference room, turning my grief into paperwork. I printed out the screenshots from the camera feed, the image of the whiteboard, the movers hauling the mattress, the box labeled Toss Lauren Stuff. I printed the deed showing Ironwood Harbor Capital as the owner. I printed the forged USPS document. I organized everything into a thick black binder. I labeled the tabs: proof of ownership, evidence of trespass, forgery, damage to property. It felt heavy in my hands. It felt like a weapon. Now, Daniel said, leaning against the doorframe as I packed up. Here is the hardest part. You have to go back, but you do not go back to sleep. You go back to provoke the final step. Provoke them? I asked. If you just change the locks while they are out, they will break a window to get back in, and the police might still call it a civil dispute because their stuff is inside. Daniel explained. We need them to try to force entry after being explicitly told the property is closed. We need a confrontation that is recorded, witnessed, and clearly shows them as the aggressors. We need grounds for an immediate restraining order. If we get a protective order, the police have to remove them. It overrides the tenancy laws. So I have to let them scream at me, I said, feeling a cold knot in my stomach. You have to be the ice queen, Daniel corrected. You go there tomorrow. You bring the security team. You bring the locksmith. You tell them they have 1 hour to vacate corporate property. When they explode, and they will explode, you let the cameras roll. You let Mr. Landon watch from his porch. You let them dig their own grave. I looked at the binder. I looked at the forged signature on my phone screen. I thought about my mother measuring my windows for her drapes, erasing my existence with every inch of fabric she planned to hang. I can do that, I said. Good, Daniel said, because once we pull this trigger, there is no going back. You are firing your family. They fired me a long time ago, I said. They just forgot to tell me. I walked out of the office and into the cooling evening air. The sun was setting, casting long, bruised shadows across the parking lot. I picked up my phone and dialed Mr. Landon. Hello? His gruff voice answered on the second ring. Mr. Landon, this is Lauren Potter from next door, I said, my voice steady and professional. I am sorry to disturb your evening, but I wanted to alert you to a security situation at my property. I am dealing with a hostile intrusion, and I wanted to let you know that there will be police activity tomorrow. If you see anything unusual tonight, I would appreciate it if you made a note of it. Intrusion? He asked. I saw that truck. Thought you were moving out. No, sir, I said. I am definitely not moving out. Next, I called the locksmith Daniel recommended, then the security firm. I coordinated times. I authorized rush fees. I spent $2,000 in 20 minutes, and I did not regret a single cent. Finally, I sat in my car and looked at the live feed of my house one last time. It was dark now. The lights were on in the living room. I could see Brianna drinking wine, my wine, out of a mug. Carol was sitting in my favorite armchair, her feet up on the ottoman. They looked so comfortable. They looked so settled. They had no idea that I was not crying in a hotel room. They had no idea that I was currently holding a binder that contained the legal equivalent of a demolition charge. I started the car. I would not sleep at home tonight. I would stay at a hotel downtown, one with crisp white sheets and a door that locked. I needed to rest, because tomorrow I was not going to work. Tomorrow I was going to war. The morning sun was filtering through the blinds of the Ironwood Harbor Capitol conference room, but I was sitting in the dark. I had told my staff I was handling a sensitive remote negotiation and was not to be disturbed. In reality, I was running a command center. My laptop screen was split into 4 quadrants, streaming the live feed from the high-definition cameras Titan Security had installed only 3 hours ago. I had timed it perfectly. I knew Brianna usually did the school drop-off run at 8 in the morning, and Carol always went with her to get coffee. The moment their beat-up SUV had cleared the driveway, my locksmith had swooped in like a pit crew. Within 20 minutes, the standard tumbler locks were gone, replaced by commercial-grade, biometric keypads. Now, I waited. It was 11 o'clock when the convoy appeared. It was like watching a slow-motion car crash. First came the rental truck, returning for what I assumed was the furniture from Brianna's apartment. Then came Brianna's SUV, packed to the roof with garbage bags full of clothes. Carol stepped out first. She was wearing that same navy blazer, carrying a clipboard. She looked authoritative, ready to direct traffic. Brianna was already shouting at the boys to start grabbing boxes. "Come on, move it," Brianna yelled, her voice tinny through my laptop speakers. "I want the living room set up before lunch." They marched up the driveway, a chaotic parade of entitlement. Carol reached the front door first. She did not even look at the handle. She just jammed her key, the emergency key, toward the lock. Clink? Metal hit metal, but there was nowhere for the key to go. I leaned closer to the screen. Carol froze. She pulled the key back, looked at it, wiped it on her blazer, and tried again. She was expecting a keyhole. Instead, She was staring at a sleek black touch panel that was glowing with a faint red ring. "What on earth?" I heard her mutter. "What is it, Mom?" Brianna asked, dropping a box of toys on the porch. "The lock," Carol said, her voice rising in pitch. It is gone. There is no hole." She started pounding on the door with the flat of her hand. Lauren! Lauren! Open this door right now. This is not funny." I did not move. I just watched. Mr. Landon, my neighbor, appeared on the feed from the side camera. He was wearing his gardening hat and holding a pair of shears. He walked over to the edge of the property line, exactly as we had discussed the night before. "Everything all right over here?" Mr. Landon asked, his voice calm and deep. "She locked us out," Carol shrieked, spinning around to face him. "My daughter changed the locks while we were on a school run. We have children here. We live here." "Actually, ma'am," Mr. Landon said, crossing his arms. "I spoke to the owner last night. She indicated there was a security concern regarding unauthorized access. The police have been notified to patrol the area." "Unauthorized access?" Brianna screamed, stepping forward. "I am her sister. These are her nephews. You cannot lock family out." "It is private property," Mr. Landon said, unmoved. "I suggest you step off the porch before the alarm triggers." Carol turned red. It was a deep, violet shade of fury I remembered from my childhood whenever I forgot to do the dishes. She reached into her purse and pulled out her phone. "Fine," she spat. "If she wants to play legal games, we will play. I am calling 911. I watched, my heart hammering against my ribs, as my mother dialed the emergency number. She put the phone to her ear, her face twisting into a mask of pure, tragic victimhood. "Yes, hello? I need police immediately at 420 Ridgeview Lane." Carol sobbed into the phone. The transformation was instant. "My daughter. She is having a mental break. She has locked me and her 3 infant nephews out of the house. We have no water. It is 90 degrees out here. She is abusing us. Please, hurry." I closed my laptop. It was time. I grabbed the thick black binder from the table, my war binder, and walked out to my car. I was only 5 minutes away. When I pulled onto my street, the scene was chaotic. A police cruiser was already there, lights flashing but siren off. 2 officers were standing on my lawn. Carol was clutching the arm of one officer, weeping theatrically, while Brianna sat on the front steps with her head in her hands, the picture of a destitute mother. I parked my silver sedan right behind the police cruiser. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror. I looked sharp, cold, professional. I stepped out, clutching the binder to my chest. "Officers," I said, my voice projecting clearly over Carol's sobs. Carol whipped around. "There she is! There is the monster!" She pointed a shaking finger at me. "Arrest her! She is endangering children!" The older officer, a man with a graying mustache, held up a hand to silence her and walked toward me. "Ma'am, are you Lauren Potter?" "I am," I said calmly. "I am the director of Ironwood Harbor Capital, the entity that owns this property." "Your mother claims you locked them out of their primary residence," the officer said, looking tired. "She says they have been living here for weeks." "That is a lie," I said. I placed the binder on the hood of the police car and flipped it open to the first tab. "This is a commercial asset. No one resides here but me. And even I am a tenant of my company. These are the security logs from the past 30 days. As you can see, there was no motion detected in the guest rooms until yesterday afternoon when they broke in while I was at work." "Broke in?" Brianna yelled, jumping up. "We have a key. You gave it to us." "I gave a spare key for medical emergencies," I corrected, looking only at the officer. "Not for tenancy." Carol stopped crying instantly. Her eyes narrowed. She reached into her oversized tote bag. "You want paperwork?" "I have paperwork." She pulled out the blue folder I had seen on the console table yesterday. She thrust it at the officer. "This is a signed cohabitation agreement. Lauren signed it 3 months ago. It grants the Pierce Potter family indefinite residency rights in exchange for domestic care. It is a binding contract. The officer took the document. He scanned it, his brow furrowing. It says here you are all legal residents as of March. My stomach dropped for a split second, but I remembered Daniel's voice. Facts. Just facts. Officer, I said, may I see the signature page? The officer hesitated, then flipped to the back page and held it out. There it was, Lauren Potter. The L had a weird, jittery loop at the top, and the P trailed off illegibly. I need you to look at my driver's license, I said, pulling my ID from my wallet. I handed it to him. And then I need you to look at the articles of incorporation for my company in this binder. Look at the signatures. The officer looked at the license, then he looked at the contract, then he looked at the binder. He did this 3 times. The signature on this agreement does not match, the officer said, looking up at Carol. The slant is wrong, and the pen pressure is inconsistent. She changed her signature, Carol shouted. She signed it quickly because she was in a rush. And there is another problem, I added, pointing to the header of the fake contract. This document lists the property owner as Lauren Potter, but as I stated, and as the deed in my binder proves, I do not own this house. Ironwood Harbor Capital does. I cannot sign away residency rights for a property I do not personally hold title to without a corporate resolution. This contract is legally void, even if the signature were real, which it is not. The air went silent. The only sound was the cicadas buzzing in the heat and the distant sound of the rental truck idling. The officer handed the blue folder back to Carol, but he did not let go of it immediately. He gave her a hard look. Ma'am, presenting a forged document to a police officer to influence a civil dispute is a very serious road to go down. I suggest you put this away. Carol snatched the folder back, her face draining of color. This is a civil matter, the officer announced, turning to address the group. However, since the property is titled to a corporation and you have no valid lease, and the owner is present requesting your removal, you are trespassing. You need to vacate the premises. But my stuff is inside, Brianna wailed. My mattress, my kids' clothes. You have 30 minutes to retrieve essential items, the officer said. Then you need to leave. If you return without a court order, you will be arrested for trespassing. You cannot do this, Carol hissed, stepping toward me. The tears were gone now, replaced by a venomous, cold hatred. I am your mother. I gave you life. And I am taking my life back, I said, meeting her gaze without flinching. Get your boxes off my porch. For a moment, I thought she was going to hit me. Her hand twitched at her side, but then she looked at the officer, who had his hand resting near his belt. She swallowed the scream that was building in her throat. Fine, Carol muttered. She turned to Brianna. Get the boys. Get the essentials. We are leaving. As she brushed past me, she leaned in close, so close I could smell her hairspray. You think a binder makes you safe? She whispered, her voice a low rattle. Paper tears. Lauren. Paper tears. We will fix the paperwork, and when we do, I will own you. I watched them scramble. It was humiliating and messy. They dragged boxes back to the truck. Brianna was crying real tears now, terrified tears, while the boys looked confused and scared. Part of me, the weak part, the daughter part, wanted to vomit. I wanted to write them a check. I wanted to fix it. But then I looked at the officer holding my binder, the shield I had built from the truth. Is there anything else, Ms. Potter? The officer asked, as the truck engine roared to life. No, officer, I said. Just the report. I need a full report filed today. You will have it, he said. I stood on the driveway as my family drove away. They did not look back. I was victorious. I had won the battle. But as the dust settled on the driveway, and I looked at the scuff marks on my porch, I knew Carol was right about one thing. This was not the end. It was just the opening shot. The silence in Daniel Marsh's office was a sharp contrast to the chaos of my front lawn. I sat in the leather guest chair, my hands clasped so tightly that my knuckles were white. The police report had been filed. but Daniel was pacing the length of the room. His tie loosened, a look of grim determination on his face. "We have to strike now," Daniel said, turning to face me. "We cannot wait for them to regroup. If we wait, they will file a civil suit claiming constructive eviction. They will paint you as the wealthy, heartless daughter who threw a grandmother and 3 children onto the street. We need to control the narrative before they can open their mouths in front of a judge." "What are you suggesting?" I asked. "A preemptive strike," Daniel replied. "We file for an immediate temporary restraining order and a civil injunction against harassment. We frame this not as a property dispute, but as a safety issue: the forgery, the unauthorized key duplication, the surveillance footage of them plotting. That is our ammunition. We need to get a judge to legally bar them from the property before they can file a single motion." I nodded. It made sense. It was the same way I handled hostile market takeovers. You did not wait for the competition to buy up shares. You enacted a poison pill defense immediately. We filed the emergency petition that afternoon. Because of the evidence of document forgery, a felony in Colorado, and the potential for escalation, the court granted us an expedited hearing for the very next morning. I felt a strange mixture of nausea and relief. The courtroom was my arena. I understood rules, evidence, and timelines. The house had been an emotional swamp, but a court of law was a sterile, logical place where tears did not count as currency. But my family did not go down without a fight. By 6 o'clock that evening, we received notice that Carol had retained counsel. It was not a high-end firm. It was a strip mall lawyer named Saul Goodman. No, that was a joke I made to myself. His name was actually Peter Vance, a man known for chasing ambulances and stretching the truth until it snapped. Their counterfiling was a masterpiece of fiction. I read through the affidavit Carol had submitted, and my jaw tightened with every sentence. She accused me of emotional and financial abuse. She claimed that Ironwood Harbor Capital was built on seed money from family savings, a blatant lie. Considering I had worked 2 jobs to fund my first LLC filing while she was asking to borrow money for cigarettes. But the most dangerous lie was the claim regarding the house. She stated that I had made a verbal contract over Christmas dinner, promising the house to Brianna and the boys, and that the cohabitation agreement was just a memorialization of that promise. Then came Brianna's affidavit. It was designed to break hearts. She described herself and her sons as virtually homeless, living in unsafe conditions, which I had promised to alleviate. Attached to the file were photos of my nephews sleeping on deflated air mattresses in her cramped apartment living room, looking miserable. I knew my sister well enough to know she had staged those photos. She had likely deflated the mattresses herself to make the scene look more pathetic. But the lowest blow came at 8 o'clock that night. My phone rang. It was an unknown number, I answered, expecting Daniel. "Ms. Potter?" a woman's voice asked. "This is Officer Miller from Child Protective Services. We received an anonymous tip regarding the welfare of 3 minors related to you. The report alleges that you knowingly exposed children to hazardous conditions by locking them out of their primary residence without access to food or water." The room spun. They had called CPS on me. They were trying to destroy my reputation and my career by labeling me a child endangerer. "That is completely false," I said, my voice shaking with rage. "I have legal counsel, and there is a police report from this morning documenting that the children were never residents of my property. They were attempting to trespass." I conferenced Daniel in immediately. He was brilliant. He shut down the inquiry in 10 minutes, emailing the officer the police report, the deed to the house, and the security footage showing Brianna loading the children into her car. Perfectly safe and healthy. The case was closed as unfounded, but the officer left me with a chilling warning. "Ms. Potter," she said before hanging up, "these types of calls usually come from close family. If they are willing to weaponize child services, you need to be very careful. They are looking for any lever they can pull." I did not sleep that night. I sat up reviewing the binder, memorizing every date, every timestamp. The next morning, the sun was shining, but the air inside the county courthouse was recycled and cold. I wore my darkest charcoal suit. The one I wore to fire underperforming asset managers. I needed to look like iron. When I walked into the courtroom, I saw them. Carol was sitting at the plaintiff's table, or rather, the respondent's table in this hearing, wearing a soft, pastel cardigan I had never seen before. She looked frail. She was clutching a tissue. Brianna was next to her, looking deliberately disheveled. No makeup, hair pulled back in a messy bun. They were in character. The judge, a stern woman named Judge Holloway, called the session to order. Carol's lawyer, Mr. Vance, started with a theatrical opening statement. He painted me as the corporate wolf devouring the sheep. He spoke of filial duty and verbal contracts. He actually pointed at me and said, "Your Honor, this woman has millions in assets, yet she denies her own flesh and blood a roof over their heads based on a technicality." Then Carol took the stand. She cried on cue. She clutched her chest. "I just wanted us to be together," she sobbed, looking at the judge with pleading eyes. "I gave up everything for Lauren. I worked my fingers to the bone so she could go to college. And now? She treats me like a stranger. She promised us that house. She said, 'Mom, I bought this for us.' And now she changes the locks?" It was a compelling performance. If I did not know her, I might have believed it. Brianna was next. She did not cry. She trembled. "I have nowhere to go," she whispered into the microphone. "My boys. They asked me why Auntie Lauren hates them. I did not know what to tell them." I felt the eyes of the few people in the gallery boring into the back of my neck. I looked like a monster. Then it was my turn. Daniel guided me through the testimony. I did not cry. I did not raise my voice. I was a scalpel. "Ms. Potter, did you ever promise your mother or sister the house?" Daniel asked. "Vos?" "No," I stated clearly. "The house is an asset of Ironwood Harbor Capital. It is against my company bylaws to use corporate assets for personal family housing without a board resolution. No such resolution exists." "And the cohabitation agreement?" Daniel asked. "I have never seen that document before yesterday," I said. "The signature is a forgery." Mr. Vance tried to cross-examine me, asking if I loved my family. "I love them enough to not let them commit fraud," I replied, cutting him off. Then came the turning point. Daniel stood up and addressed the judge. "Your Honor, we would like to submit Exhibit C. This is a preliminary analysis from a forensic handwriting expert regarding the signature on the document the respondents presented to the police yesterday." The air in the room changed. Carol stopped dabbing her eyes. Brianna sat up straighter. Daniel handed the report to the bailiff. "The expert concludes with high certainty that the signature on the cohabitation agreement is a simulation. It shows signs of hesitation, pen lifts, and tremor that are consistent with tracing. Furthermore, the signature on the USPS change of address form, which is a federal document, shows the exact same anomalies." Judge Holloway put on her glasses and read the report. Silence stretched out for a minute that felt like an hour. When she looked up, her expression had shifted from neutral to severe. She looked at Carol, who was now picking at her fingernails, the frailty gone. "Mr. Vance?" the judge said, her voice like gravel. "Is your client aware that submitting forged documents to a court of law is perjury?" "Mr. Vance looked panicked. "Your Honor, my client maintains the document is genuine." "The court does not share your client's confidence," Judge Holloway snapped. She banged her gavel. "I am granting the petitioner's request for a temporary restraining order. Carol Pierce and Brianna Pierce are to stay 500 feet away from Ms. Potter and the property at 420 Ridgeview Lane. They are to have no contact, electronic or otherwise." Carol gasped. "But the house, where will we go?" "That is not the concern of this court," the judge said. "And furthermore, I am retaining the original copy of this agreement and the expert report. I am forwarding these files to the district attorney's office for review regarding potential charges of forgery and filing false instruments." Brianna let out a small shriek. "Criminal charges?" "Court is adjourned," Judge Holloway said, standing up. I let out a breath I felt like I'd been holding for 24 hours. Daniel squeezed my shoulder. We did it. And the criminal referral? That is the nail in the coffin. They will be too busy finding criminal defense lawyers to bother you about the house. We walked out of the courtroom. I felt lighter, but my hands were still shaking. In the hallway, the theater was over. Carol and Brianna were standing near the elevators, arguing with their lawyer. When they saw me, Mr. Vance tried to usher them away, but Carol broke free. She walked right up to me. The soft grandmotherly look was gone. Her face was hard. Her eyes narrowed into slits of pure malice. She did not yell. She stepped into my personal space, ignoring the restraining order that was not yet printed. "You think you are smart," she hissed, her voice low and venomous. "You think because you have money and fancy lawyers you can humiliate me?" "I protected myself," I said, meeting her gaze. "You did this." "I know things, Lauren," Carol whispered, and a chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. "I know where you came from. I know about the money from Dad's insurance that went missing years ago. I can spin a story that will make your investors run so fast your head will spin. I will burn your reputation to the ground." "Are you threatening me?" I asked. "I am promising you." She smiled, and it was a terrifying expression. "You might have the house, but I will make sure you have no one to invite into it. This is not over." She turned and marched into the elevator, dragging a sobbing Brianna with her. The doors closed, cutting off her image, but the threat hung in the air like smoke. Daniel walked up beside me. "She is bluffing. It is the extinction burst. Narcissists always lash out when they lose control." "I know," I said, but deep down, a new fear was taking root. I had won the legal battle, but Carol was right about one thing. Reputation was fragile, and she was a master storyteller who had nothing left to lose. "Let's go," I said to Daniel. "I need to get back to work. I have a company to run." But as we walked out into the blinding midday sun, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was not walking away from a victory, but walking into a trap I couldn't see yet. The court order was just a piece of paper. My mother was a force of nature, and she had just declared a scorched earth war. The glass doors of Ironwood Harbor Capital had always represented a threshold between the chaotic noise of the world and the ordered precision of my career. Usually, walking through them felt like putting on armor, but when I returned to the office the day after the hearing, the armor felt paper-thin. The atmosphere had shifted. It was subtle, like a change in barometric pressure before a storm. The receptionist, a bright young woman named Chloe who usually greeted me with updates on her golden retriever, offered a tight, polite smile and immediately looked down at her keyboard. As I walked down the hallway to my corner office, I could feel the silence rippling out ahead of me. Conversations stopped abruptly. Heads ducked behind monitors. I sat at my desk and opened my email, expecting client inquiries. Instead, I found a meeting request from Sarah, my executive assistant. She walked in 2 minutes later, not with her usual notepad, but with her phone in her hand. "Lauren," she said, her voice hesitant. She didn't sit down. "I have to ask you something, and I am sorry, but it is affecting the team morale." "Go ahead," I said, keeping my face neutral, though my stomach clamped tight. "Is it true?" she asked. "Did you really evict your mother and those little boys? Did you leave them on the street?" I looked at her. Sarah had worked for me for 4 years. She knew I paid above market rates. She knew I sponsored the local girls' coding camp. Yet, the doubt in her eyes was genuine. "Where did you hear that?" I asked. She turned her phone screen toward me. It was a Facebook post. My mother, Carol, had been busy. The post was an essay, a masterpiece of victimhood titled "A Mother's Heartbreak." In it, she described how she had toiled for decades to raise a successful daughter, only to be discarded like trash the moment she needed help. She claimed I lived in a mansion while my sister and nephews were forced to sleep in a car, a blatant lie, as they were back in Brianna's apartment. But the real weapon was the photo. It was a picture of my youngest nephew, Mason, looking teary-eyed and clutching a teddy bear, sitting on a curb. I recognized the curb. It was outside the courthouse, taken right after the hearing. Carol had staged a photo of a crying child to weaponize public sympathy. The post had 400 shares. The comments were a cesspool of vitriol. Heartless, monster, money changes people. I hope she rots in that big house alone. It is not true. Sarah, I said, my voice steady but cold. They have an apartment. They have a lease. They tried to seize my home illegally, and a judge granted a restraining order based on forgery and fraud. That is the truth. Sarah looked relieved, but the damage was done. The seed of the evil rich woman narrative had been planted. I left the office early. I could not stand the whispers. My phone, which I had kept on silent, was a minefield. It wasn't just strangers on the internet. It was family. Cousins I had not spoken to in 5 years were suddenly experts on my moral character. Aunt Linda, I am praying for your soul. Lauren, how can you treat family this way? Apologize to your mother. Cousin Mike, I always knew you thought you were better than us, but this is low. Let them back in. They did not ask for my side. They did not ask about the forged documents or the lies. They simply swallowed Carol's story whole because it fit the narrative they had always wanted to believe, that my success was unearned and my independence was actually selfishness. I drove home to the house on the hill. The locks were new. The cameras were recording. I was safe. But as I walked into the silent foyer, the air felt heavy. I locked the door behind me, 3 deadbolts now, and stood in the center of the living room. It was immaculate. It was quiet. It was everything I had fought for. And it felt like a prison. I walked into the bathroom and turned on the shower, making the water as hot as I could stand. I stepped in without waiting for the steam to build. I stood under the spray, letting the scalding water hit my back, and finally, the dam broke. I slid down the tiled wall until I was curled into a ball on the floor, sobbing so hard my chest ached. It was a guttural, ugly sound, masked only by the roar of the water. I cried for the little girl who just wanted her mom to be proud of her report card. I cried for the teenager who worked double shifts while her sister got a convertible. I cried because, despite everything, despite the theft, the lies, the court order, I still felt guilty. That was their true power. They had installed a button in my psyche 30 years ago, and they were pressing it over and over again. You are bad. You are selfish. You owe us. I might have stayed on that floor all night if the doorbell hadn't rung. I ignored it at first, but then my phone buzzed. It was a text from Melanie. Open the damn door. Lauren, I know you are in there, and I have Thai food and expensive wine. Melanie was the only person in Maple Ridge who knew the whole story. We had met in college, bonded over cheap coffee and ambition. She was a no-nonsense criminal defense attorney who had seen worse families than mine, which was saying something. I dried off, put on a robe, and let her in. She didn't hug me. She walked past me, put the takeout bags on the island, uncorked a bottle of Cabernet, poured 2 large glasses, and handed one to me. Drink, she ordered. Then eat. Then tell me what the witches posted today. We sat on the floor of the living room. I showed her the Facebook post. I showed her the texts from Aunt Linda. They are winning, I whispered. Everyone thinks I am a monster. They are not winning, Melanie said, stabbing a piece of chicken with her chopstick. They are making noise. There is a difference. Carol is playing to the gallery because she lost in the courtroom. It is the only court she has left, the court of public opinion. But likes on Facebook do not override a restraining order. But the kids, I said, my voice cracking. Melanie, Mason sent me a message on Roblox. He asked why I was mad at him. He asked if he could come over and play. I did not answer him. I ignored a 7-year-old boy. What kind of person does that? Melanie set her wine glass down. She turned to me, her expression fierce. A responsible one, she said firmly. Listen to me. Lauren, you are not keeping those kids from a home. They have a home. You are keeping them from being used as pawns. If you answer that text, If you let them come over for one afternoon, do you know what happens? Carol calls the police and says you are violating the order by inviting contact, or she uses it to manipulate you into letting Brianna in to pick them up. You cannot save those boys by enabling their mother. It feels like I am punishing them, I said. You are teaching them, Melanie corrected. It is a harsh lesson, and maybe they will not understand it until they are 30, but you are teaching them that actions have consequences. You are showing them that it is okay to say no to abuse, even when it comes from family. That might be the most valuable thing anyone ever teaches them. She gestured around the room. This house is not a dormitory for wayward adults. It is your home. You worked for it. You do not owe them square footage just because you share DNA. Being a good daughter does not mean setting yourself on fire to keep them warm. We talked until midnight. By the time Melanie left, the crushing weight in my chest had lightened just enough for me to breathe. After she was gone, I sat at my kitchen island with a notepad. I needed to get the poison out. I started writing a letter, not to the judge, not to my lawyer, to them. Dear Mom, dear Brianna, I remember when I was 10 and I won the spelling bee. You forgot to pick me up because Brianna needed a ride to the mall. I walked home in the rain. I remember when I was 20 and you told me my startup idea was stupid and that I should just marry a rich man like Brianna did. I remember every check I wrote, the electric bills, the bail money for Brianna's ex, the groceries. I wrote for an hour. I listed every indignity, every stolen moment, every dollar. I wrote about the fake contract. I wrote about the pain of seeing my house, my sanctuary, carved up on a whiteboard like a carcass. I poured all the anger, the hurt, and the grief onto the paper. The ink smeared in places where my hand was sweating. When I was finished, I folded the letter, I put it in an envelope, I wrote Mom on the front. Then, I walked over to the shredder in my home office and fed it through. I watched the paper turn into confetti. I was never going to send it. They would not read it. They would not care. Giving them my feelings was just giving them more ammunition. But writing it had shifted something inside me. The guilt was receding, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. They wanted a story? They wanted to tell the world that I was the villain? Fine. I looked at the shredder bin. I realized that for years, I had been playing defense. I had been hiding their secrets, covering their debts, protecting their reputation because I was afraid of embarrassing the family. I was done protecting them. If Carol wanted to fight this in the public eye, I would not engage in a Facebook war. I would not post sad selfies. I would release the facts. I thought about the file Daniel had started, the police reports, the affidavits from previous landlords who had evicted Brianna for non-payment, the evidence of the forged federal documents. I was not going to let them destroy my reputation with a fairy tale. I was going to dismantle their lie with the truth. I went to bed that night without crying. I felt a strange sense of calm. The daughter who craved approval was gone, washed away in that shower. In her place was the CEO of Ironwood Harbor Capital, and she had a strategy. Tomorrow, I would call Daniel. It was time to stop hiding the skeletons in the Potter family closet. It was time to open the door and let the world see exactly who Carol and Brianna really were. The conference room at Marsh & Associates had become my second home. The air smelled of stale coffee and printer toner, a scent that I was beginning to associate with the slow, deliberate dismantling of my family mythology. We were no longer reacting to the invasion. We were conducting an autopsy on the years of manipulation that had led up to it. Daniel sat at the head of the table, surrounded by stacks of paper that looked like skyscrapers in a miniature city. He slid a thin file across the polished wood toward me. We ran a comprehensive background check on civil filings in the tri-state area, Daniel said, his voice devoid of emotion. Lauren, this was not their first rodeo. It was not even their second. I opened the file. Inside were photocopies of court dockets from 3 and 4 years ago. I scanned the legal jargon, my eyes catching familiar names. Carol Pierce versus John D. Miller, Brianna Pierce versus Summit Ridge Apartments. What am I looking at? I asked, though a cold knot was already forming in my stomach. A pattern, Daniel answered. In 2018, your mother moved in with a boyfriend. When they broke up 2 months later, she refused to leave. She claimed she had established tenancy and threatened to sue him for illegal eviction if he changed the locks. He paid her $2,000 just to get her out. I turned the page. And here, Daniel pointed to a document from a rental complex in Denver. Brianna stopped paying rent 4 months into a year-long lease. When the landlord filed for eviction, she countersued for uninhabitable conditions, mold, rats, broken heating. The case dragged on for 6 months while she lived there for free. The landlord eventually dropped the claim just to get possession back. It is a grift. Lauren, they move in, they entrench, and they make it too expensive to remove them. I felt a wave of nausea, followed immediately by a flash of anger. I had believed their stories. When Brianna had told me about that slumlord in Denver who hated single mothers, I had sent her money for a moving truck. I had believed I was helping a victim. I was actually funding a predator. I want to talk to them, I said. The landlords. Daniel nodded. I thought you might. We tracked down the owner of the last apartment Brianna was evicted from, a Mr. Henderson. He is very eager to speak with you. We made the call on speakerphone. Mr. Henderson sounded old and tired, his voice rasping over the line. When I introduced myself as Brianna's sister, there was a long, heavy silence. I am not giving her a reference, he spat out. That woman owes me $4,000. I am not asking for a reference, I said calmly. I am currently in a legal dispute with her regarding a similar situation. I need to know if she used her children to leverage the property. Leverage? Mr. Henderson laughed, a dry, bitter sound. Lady, she used those kids like human shields. Every time I posted a notice on the door, she would call the local news station and say, I was throwing babies into the snow. She told the neighbors I was a monster. She knows the system better than any lawyer I have ever met. She stopped paying rent the second month she moved in. She said she was saving for a house. I guess that house was yours. Would you be willing to sign an affidavit stating that? Daniel interjected. That she expressed an intent to withhold rent to save for another property? I would sign it in blood if it stops her from doing it to someone else. Mr. Henderson said. We hung up. I stared at the phone. The narrative of the desperate, struggling mother was dissolving, revealing a calculated operator underneath. But the investigation did not stop there. Daniel's paralegal, a sharp young man named Marcus, walked in with another stack of papers. I found something interesting in the community gossip channels, Marcus said. It seems your mother has been telling a very specific story to anyone who will listen for the past 5 years. He laid out printed screenshots from local community Facebook groups and email chains from the church volunteer committee. Read the highlighted sections, Marcus said. I looked at a post from 2 years ago. Carol was commenting on a photo of my office building. So proud of my daughter's firm. It was a risk investing my retirement savings into her startup, but I knew she would make us all rich. I looked up at Marcus, my mouth falling open. She never invested a dime. I took out student loans. I maxed out 3 credit cards. She asked me for $20 for gas on the day I incorporated. There are dozens of these, Marcus said. She has been planting the seed that Ironwood Harbor Capital is a family business for years. She tells the ladies at the church that she is a silent partner. She tells your cousins that she paid for your college. She has built a public perception that she owns a piece of your success. That is why everyone is on her side. They think you are stealing her investment. It was a masterstroke of manipulation. She hadn't just stolen my house. She had stolen the credit for my entire life. She had rewritten history so that my hard work was actually her generosity. No wonder the town thought I was ungrateful. In their eyes, I was the daughter who took the mother's money and then locked her out. This is fraud, I said, my voice trembling with rage. This is financial slander. It is actionable, Daniel agreed. But wait, there is more. He pulled out a set of documents that looked like government forms. We cross-referenced the addresses Brianna used for her state assistance applications against the addresses she listed on her lease agreements. They do not match. He pointed to a line on a form from last year. to get higher benefits. She claimed she was living in a different county with a higher cost of living adjustment, but her lease proves she was living 5 miles from here. That is welfare fraud. Lauren, if this comes out, she does not just lose the house fight. She faces criminal charges and repayment of thousands of dollars. I looked at the mountain of evidence. For years, I had walked on eggshells, terrified of upsetting them, terrified of being the bad sister. Meanwhile, they had been operating a criminal enterprise of lies, fraud, and theft, using my silence as their cover. I want to cement this, I said, looking at Daniel. The paper trail is good, but I need character witnesses. I need people who can testify that we were never the happy, codependent family she is claiming we were. I spent the afternoon making difficult calls. I called the guidance counselor at my nephew's elementary school. She was hesitant at first, citing privacy, but when I explained I was trying to protect the children from an unstable housing situation, she opened up. Mrs. Pierce is difficult, the counselor said carefully. She is frequently late. The children are often unkempt, and we have had multiple meetings where she blamed the school for her lack of organization. We have never seen you, Ms. Potter. We actually have no record of you being involved in their care until the emergency contact update last week. Last week? I asked. Yes, the counselor said. Mrs. Pierce called last Monday to add you as the primary emergency contact and change the children's address to Ridgeview Lane. She said you had agreed to take full custody if anything happened to her. I hung up, my hands shaking. They had planned to trap me from every angle. If I had not come home that day, if I had let them stay one night, they would have had the school, the state, and the police believing I was the primary guardian. By 5 o'clock, the sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the conference room table. I was exhausted, but it was a clean exhaustion, the kind you feel after scrubbing a dirty floor. My phone buzzed on the table. It was a notification from a gaming app I hadn't opened in months. Dragon Slayer Quest. I had downloaded it a year ago to play with my middle nephew, Noah, during a Thanksgiving where I was trying desperately to connect with him. I unlocked the phone. There was a private message from user Noah the Destroyer 09. Auntie Lauren? My thumb hovered over the screen. Melanie's voice echoed in my head. Do not engage. But this was not an engagement. This was a child reaching out from the chaos. I did not reply. I just watched the screen. A second message popped up. Are you mad at us? Mom and Grandma said you kicked us out and you hate us. But I missed the big house. It was better than the boxes. I felt a pang of heartache, but I read the next line, and the heartache froze into ice. We had all our stuff packed in boxes for 3 weeks. Mom said we were going on a surprise adventure to Auntie Lauren's forever. Why did the adventure stop? I stared at the words, packed in boxes for 3 weeks. They had not been evicted suddenly. They had not been in a crisis. They had spent nearly a month packing, planning, and waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The emergency was a fabrication. The tears were rehearsed. While I was buying them Christmas presents, they were packing boxes to invade my home. I took a screenshot of the message, then another. Then I exported the chat log and emailed it to Daniel sitting across from me. Check your inbox, I said quietly. Daniel opened the email. He read the message. He looked up at me, a slow, predatory smile spreading across his face. Out of the mouths of babes, Daniel said softly. This destroys the sudden necessity defense. This proves premeditation. It proves the emergency key was obtained under false pretenses for a planned event. I looked at the message one last time. Why did the adventure stop? Because, I whispered to the empty room, the dragon woke up. I felt a strange sensation in my chest. It wasn't happiness. It wasn't even relief. It was the cold, hard satisfaction of a ledger finally balancing. I had the landlord. I had the fraud. I had the lies about the investment. And now, I had the confession of a child who didn't know he was holding the smoking gun. File it, I told Daniel. File everything, and send a copy to Mr. Vance. I want them to know that we know. I want them to know that the next time they walk into a courtroom, they are not walking in as victims. They are walking in as defendants. I stood up and gathered my things. The fear was gone. The guilt was gone. All that was left was the truth, and for the first time in my life, I was going to use it like a weapon. The court clerk set the date for the final hearing on a Tuesday morning, exactly 14 days after the temporary restraining order had been issued. It felt less like a court date and more like the ticking timer on a bomb. This was it. The hearing would decide the permanent status of the protection order, but more importantly, it would address the validity of the documents Carol and Brianna had tried to use to seize my property. It was the day the truth would finally have its day in court. My lawyer, Daniel, had turned his conference room into what he called the war room. It lived up to the name. The large mahogany table was completely invisible beneath a layer of documents, photographs, and printed text logs. It was a cartography of betrayal. "Look at this," Daniel said, arranging the papers into a timeline. "It is a perfect circle of fraud." He pointed to the first pile. The affidavit from Brianna's former landlord, detailing her history of using tenancy laws to squat in apartments she wasn't paying for. Then, he pointed to the second pile, the forged USPS change of address forms and the fake cohabitation agreement with my shaky, traced signature. Finally, he placed the screenshot of my nephew Noah's text message in the center. "We had all our stuff packed in boxes for 3 weeks. This is the narrative," Daniel said, his eyes intense. "They want to tell a story about a sudden crisis and a heartless daughter. We are going to tell a story about a premeditated corporate takeover. We have the motive. Your mother's lies about investing in your firm. We have the method, the forged residency papers, and we have the confession, the child confirming the timeline." Then, Daniel dropped the bombshell. "And there is one more thing," he said, lowering his voice. "I received a call from the district attorney's office this morning. They have opened a preliminary review based on the documents Judge Holloway forwarded to them. They are looking into charges for filing false instruments and welfare fraud regarding Brianna's address falsification. Lauren, this is getting real. If we win today, your mother and sister are not just looking at eviction, they are looking at probation, fines, or potentially jail time." I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. Jail. I had never wanted to send my mother to jail. I just wanted her out of my house. But as I looked at the mountain of evidence, I realized that she had walked herself into that cell the moment she picked up a pen and decided to sign my name. "They brought this on themselves," I said, though my voice sounded quieter than I intended. "Exactly," Daniel said, "and they are not going down quietly. You know who is coming tomorrow?" I shook my head. "Everyone," Daniel said grimly. "Carol has invited the entire extended family, aunts, cousins, people you have not seen since your high school graduation. She told them she wants them there to witness justice when you are exposed. She thinks the courtroom is a stage." "She wants an audience," I said, realizing the depth of her narcissism. "She thinks if she cries in front of enough people, the law will bend." "Let them come," Daniel said, stacking the files into his briefcase. "The more people who see the truth, the harder it will be for her to lie about it later." The night before the hearing, I was alone in the house on the hill. For the first time in weeks, the silence didn't feel lonely. It felt heavy, charged with anticipation. I walked through the rooms slowly, like a museum curator inspecting a priceless exhibit. I ran my hand along the cool granite of the kitchen island where Brianna had dumped her boxes. I stood in the foyer where the movers had scratched the floor. I sat in the master bedroom that Carol had tried to claim as her own. I had almost lost it all. Not just the physical structure, but the sanctuary. They had tried to turn my safe haven into a colony for their chaos. I went into the bathroom and stood in front of the mirror. I looked tired. There were dark circles under my eyes that no amount of concealer could hide, but there was something else in the reflection, a steeliness that hadn't been there a month ago. The pleaser was dead. The good daughter who wrote checks to buy love was gone. "My name is Lauren Potter," I practiced, speaking to my reflection. "I am the owner of this property. I am not a victim." I said it again, louder. "I am not a victim." The morning of the hearing was gray and overcast, a fitting backdrop for the final act. When I arrived at the courthouse, the hallway outside courtroom 3B was already a circus. Carol had made good on her threat. It looked like a Potter family reunion. My Aunt Linda was there, glaring at me with crossed arms. My cousin Mike was leaning against the wall, shaking his head as I approached. There were at least 15 people, a wall of judgment blocking the double doors. Carol stood in the center of them, holding court. She was wearing a modest black dress, looking for all the world like a grieving widow. Brianna was next to her, looking pale and terrified. When Carol saw me, she didn't scream. She didn't cry. She detached herself from the group and walked over to me, motioning for me to step into a small alcove near the water fountains, away from the prying ears of the cousins. "Lauren," she said. Her voice was steady, dry. The mask was off. There were no tears for me here. "Mother," I acknowledged, clutching my briefcase. "We can stop this," she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "We do not have to go in there. You do not want your dirty laundry aired out in front of the judge. And I certainly do not want to see my daughter humiliated." "I am not the one who is going to be humiliated," I said. Carol stepped closer, invading my personal space. "Here is the deal. You sign over 50% ownership of the house to me, just on paper, and you let Brianna and the boys stay in the guest wing until the youngest graduates high school. We will tear up the cohabitation agreement. We will tell everyone it was a misunderstanding. We will be a family again." I stared at her. The sheer audacity was breathtaking. She was facing criminal inquiries, caught in a web of lies, and she was still trying to negotiate a hostage exchange. She wanted half my house. She wanted 18 years of free rent. "You are delusional," I said. "I am not giving you 50% of a house I worked 10 years to buy. I am not giving you a guest room. I am not giving you a parking spot." "Think about it," she hissed, her eyes narrowing into slits. "If you go in there, you lose us forever. No more Christmas. No more birthdays. You will be an orphan. Lauren." "I have been an orphan for a long time," I said. "I just didn't realize it until you tried to steal my life." I stepped back, Carol's face contorted into a mask of pure rage. But before she could speak, Brianna tugged on her sleeve. "Mom," Brianna whispered. She looked sick. Her eyes were darting around the hallway, looking at the security guards, at the lawyers. "Mom, what if we lose? The lawyer said the DA is looking at the papers. What if I go to jail? Who takes the boys?" "Shut up," Carol snapped, not even looking at her. "We are not going to lose. Lauren is bluffing." But I saw it, the crack in the foundation. Brianna was realizing that she was the expendable pawn in Carol's game. Carol would throw Brianna under the bus to save herself without a second thought. "I am not bluffing," I said to Brianna, "and you should be very worried about what your mother drafted for you to sign." I turned and walked away, leaving them in the alcove. I pushed through the crowd of glaring relatives and entered the courtroom. It was packed. Every bench was full. Daniel was already at the plaintiff's table, arranging his files with military precision. I sat next to him, my heart hammering against my ribs, but my hands were steady. "They tried to settle," I whispered to Daniel. "She wanted half the house." Daniel smirked. "Desperation. They know the walls are closing in." The bailiff shouted, "All rise!" Judge Holloway swept into the room. She looked even more formidable than she had at the initial hearing. She took her seat and surveyed the crowded room over the rim of her glasses. She frowned. "This is a courtroom, not a theater," she announced, her voice booming without a microphone. "I see a lot of spectators today. Let me be clear. Any outbursts, any whispering, any disruptions, and I will have the bailiff clear this room faster than you can blink. Is that understood?" The room fell silent. "Calling the matter of Potter versus Pierce," the clerk announced. Daniel stood up. "Ready for the plaintiff, Your Honor." Mr. Vance, looking significantly more disheveled than last time, stood up. "Ready for the respondents." We are here to determine the status of the permanent protection order and to review the evidence regarding the validity of the residency claims, Judge Holloway said. Ms. Potter, since you are the petitioner, you may make your opening statement. I stood up. I could feel the eyes of my mother, my sister, and my entire extended family boring into my back. I took a deep breath. I thought about the boxes. I thought about the forged signature. I thought about the whiteboard dividing up my home. I looked straight at the judge. Your Honor, I began, my voice clear and ringing in the silence. For 34 years, I believed that family meant support. I believed that love was something you gave freely. But 2 weeks ago, I learned that for my mother and sister, family is just a leverage point, and love is just a transaction. I paused. The room was so quiet I could hear the hum of the air conditioning. What you are about to see today is not a misunderstanding, I continued. It is not a domestic squabble. It is a calculated, premeditated plan to seize a commercial asset. It is a scheme that relied on forgery, fraud, and the cynical exploitation of my own guilt. They did not come to my house because they had nowhere to go. They came because they felt entitled to take what I had built, and they were willing to break the law to do it. I heard a gasp from the gallery. Probably Aunt Linda. I didn't turn around. We will present evidence that proves the documents submitted to this court and to the police were forged, I said. We will prove that the emergency was fabricated weeks in advance, and we will prove that the respondents have a history of using these exact tactics to exploit others. I am asking the court not just for protection, but for justice, because I am done apologizing for my own success. I sat down. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating, and absolute. Even Carol, the master of the dramatic interruption, didn't say a word. She just sat there, staring at the back of my head, realizing that the script she had written for this day had just been thrown into the fire. Daniel Marsh stood in the center of the courtroom floor. He did not pace. He did not shout. He moved with the terrifying precision of a surgeon about to excise a tumor. Your Honor, Daniel began, gesturing to the projection screen we had set up. The respondents would have you believe that the events of last Tuesday were a desperate, spontaneous reaction to a housing crisis. They claim they had nowhere to go, but the evidence tells a different story, a story of a timeline constructed months in advance. He clicked a remote. A timeline appeared on the screen, marked with bright red dates. November, Daniel stated. The respondent, Carol Pierce, uses emotional manipulation to obtain an emergency key from the petitioner. March, a change of address form is filed with the United States Postal Service, diverting Ms. Potter's mail. The signature on this federal document does not match Ms. Potter's hand. April, the so-called cohabitation agreement is drafted. Again, featuring a signature that forensic analysis confirms is a simulation. He clicked again. The image of the U-Haul truck appeared. And finally, last week, a moving company is hired, not for an emergency same-day move, but scheduled 14 days in advance. This was not a rescue mission, Your Honor. This was an invasion. Mr. Vance, Carol's lawyer, tried to object. Objection. Counsel is characterizing. Overruled, Judge Holloway said, her eyes fixed on the screen. Continue, Mr. Marsh. Daniel picked up a document from his table. But the court must ask, is this an isolated incident, or is it a pattern? He held up the affidavit we had secured from Mr. Henderson. This is a sworn statement from Mr. Robert Henderson, Brianna Pierce's former landlord. It details a 3-month period where Ms. Pierce refused to pay rent, refused to vacate, and threatened to use negative media coverage regarding her status as a single mother to damage Mr. Henderson's business. The respondents have a documented history of using tenancy laws as a weapon to occupy property they do not own. I looked at Brianna. She was shrinking in her seat, her face pale. Carol, however, was stiff as a board, her jaw set so hard I could see a muscle twitching in her cheek. And regarding the cohabitation agreement, Daniel continued, pivoting to the forensic report. Our expert witness, Dr. Aris, has testified that the signature on this document shows clear signs of tracing tremor. It is a forgery used to deceive law enforcement officers at the scene. Judge Holloway looked down at Carol. Ms. Pierce, do you have an explanation for why a document giving you rights to a multi-million-dollar property appears to be signed by someone tracing a line? Carol opened her mouth, but Daniel cut in with the final blow. Before the respondent answers, Daniel said, his voice dropping to a hush that made everyone in the gallery lean forward, I would like to enter one final piece of evidence. It addresses the claim that the respondents were suddenly homeless and forced to seek shelter. He projected the screenshot of Noah's text message. The green bubble loomed large on the screen. We had all our stuff packed in boxes for 3 weeks. This message was sent by the respondent's 7-year-old son. Daniel said, out of the mouths of babes comes the truth. They were not evicted. They were packed. They were waiting. They were ready to move into Ms. Potter's home long before any alleged emergency occurred. The silence in the room was absolute. It was the sound of a lie shattering. Suddenly, the composure Carol had maintained for decades snapped. She stood up so abruptly her chair scraped loudly against the floor. It does not matter, Carol shouted, her voice shrill and echoing off the wood paneling. It does not matter when we packed. That house was bought with family blood. She thinks she is so high and mighty with her company and her suits, but she is nothing without me. I gave her life. That house is my security. It is meant to keep us safe. Sit down. Ms. Pierce, the bailiff barked, stepping forward. No! Carol pointed a shaking finger at me. You owe me, Lauren. You ungrateful little brat. You have 3 empty bedrooms and you let your mother rot? I have a right to that house. It is family property. She had said it, in open court, on the record. She had admitted that she felt entitled to my assets regardless of the law. Daniel looked at the judge. He didn't even have to speak. Carol had just made his closing argument for him. Then, the dominoes continued to fall. Mr. Vance looked at Brianna, whispering something urgent, probably telling her to stay quiet. But Brianna was looking at her mother, who was currently being restrained by a bailiff, and then she looked at the judge. I didn't want to do it, Brianna blurted out. She was crying now. Ugly, terrified sobs. I told her it wouldn't work. I told her the lawyer said the agreement was a bad idea. Objection, Mr. Vance yelled, realizing his client was destroying herself. He told us it was illegal, Brianna screamed over him, her hysteria taking over. But Mom said you would be too scared to call the police. She said you would just fold like you always do. I just wanted a place for the boys. Please, I do not want to go to jail. The gallery erupted. My Aunt Linda had her hand over her mouth. Cousin Mike looked like he had swallowed a lemon. They had come to watch my humiliation, and instead, they were witnessing the total moral collapse of their matriarch. Judge Holloway banged her gavel. Bang, bang, bang. Order, she commanded. I have heard enough. She looked at Carol, who was now breathing heavily, her face a mask of ruined makeup and rage. Then she looked at Brianna, who was shaking in her seat. Finally, she looked at me. Her expression softened just a fraction. Ms. Potter, Judge Holloway said, the court finds the petitioner's evidence not only credible but overwhelming. The respondents have engaged in a pattern of harassment, deceit, and attempted fraud to unlawfully occupy your property. She turned to the clerk. I am issuing a permanent restraining order against Carol Pierce and Brianna Pierce. They are prohibited from coming within 500 yards of the petitioner, her home, or her place of business. Any contact, direct or indirect, will result in immediate arrest. Carol let out a gasp, collapsing back into her chair. Furthermore, the judge continued, her voice turning to steel, I am formally referring this case, including the forged documents and the testimony regarding the falsified welfare applications, to the District Attorney's Office for Criminal Prosecution. You do not come into my courtroom, lie to my face, and present forged documents without consequences. Criminal prosecution? Brianna wailed. This hearing is adjourned, the judge said, slamming the gavel down one final time. The sound rang in my ears like a church bell. It was over. I stood up. My legs felt weak, but I held my head high. I turned to look at the gallery. The wall of hostility that had greeted me an hour ago had crumbled. My relatives looked shell-shocked. Carol was being escorted out by her lawyer. She tried to look at the family, tried to catch someone's eye to garner sympathy, but nobody looked back. She was leaving the courtroom not as the victimized grandmother, but as the woman who tried to rob her own daughter. There were no hugs. There was no comfort. She walked out alone, flanked by security. As I gathered my briefcase, my Aunt Linda approached the railing. She looked small. "Lauren," she said, her voice trembling. We didn't know. The things she told us, about the investment, about the boys sleeping in the car." "She lied, Linda," I said simply. "She has been lying for a long time." "I am so sorry," she whispered. "We should have asked." "Yes," I said. "You should have." I didn't offer forgiveness, not yet. I just walked past her, out the double doors, and into the sunlight. That evening, the sun set over Maple Ridge in a blaze of purple and gold. I sat on a stool at my kitchen island, the same island where Brianna had dumped her boxes, the same island where I had found the fake contract. The house was perfectly silent. For years, silence had felt like loneliness to me. It had felt like a void that I needed to fill with their approval. But tonight, the silence felt different. It felt like peace. It felt like safety. I had a glass of wine in front of me, and a document on the counter. It was not a lawsuit. It was a draft of my new will. I had spent the afternoon with an estate planner. I had removed Carol and Brianna as beneficiaries. There would be no trust fund for the nephews to be managed by their mother. Instead, I had established the Ironwood Scholarship Fund. My assets would go to help first-generation college students, kids like I was, who were working 2 jobs and trying to escape toxic situations. I wasn't doing it out of spite. I was doing it because I finally understood the value of what I had built. My legacy wasn't my DNA. My legacy was my resilience. I took a sip of wine and looked out the window at the valley below. I thought about Carol's threat that I would be an orphan. She was wrong. I wasn't an orphan. I was a free woman. I had walked through the fire. I had faced the people who were supposed to protect me, and I had realized that I was the only protector I needed. I had locked the door on the guilt, the manipulation, and the fear. And as I watched the first stars appear in the Colorado sky, I knew that the only people who would ever walk through my door again would be the ones who respected the woman who owned it. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I know family drama can be heavy, but I hope my journey reminds you that you have the right to protect your peace, no matter who threatens it. I would love to hear from you. Please comment down below and tell me where you are listening from today. Let's build a community of support right here in the comments. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more tales of justice served, please subscribe to the Lila Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and hit that hype button so we can share this message with more people who might need to hear it. Stay strong, and remember, your life belongs to you. Shh.